Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy Election Day. Happy St. Patty's Day. If you are on this Zoom call, you are joining the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment and Energy Committee, where we're talking about changing behavior. And we've got an extraordinarily talented list of speakers joining us today. So we welcome you. We're expecting about 45 or so folks to participate, and we will kick this off in about 30 seconds. To all who filled out the Environment Committee's meeting topic survey, and to ask anyone who has not yet done so, please do. We have these important conversations once a month, and we'd love to have your input as to what to address. Again, it's Tuesday morning, March 17th. We're glad you're with us. And I always, as always, defer to my team, Edith and Cheryl and Tori and Juliet, when to tell me to actually formally begin this session. But we are still waiting for a few folks to participate and click in.
You can give it one more minute, Mayor.
You got it. One more minute it is. This may be the coldest St. Patty's Day in the history of, it's unbelievable. Now in Geneva, it's 72 and sunny. So we are delighted that you're joining us remotely. Looks like we're doing well. A few more stragglers and we're ready to kick off, correct?
Yep.
All set to go?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Burns, Mayor of Geneva, Illinois, and proud to serve as the chairperson of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus Environment and Energy Committee. We welcome you to today's conversation with an extraordinarily talented group of speakers. We're talking about encouraging behavior change for sustainability. Now, as all of you know, and I certainly know, and of course my fellow mayor and good friend from Park Ridge, who's also speaking, knows that mayors get things done. We are oftentimes tasked with doing multiple things at once. And of course, our ability, our nonpartisan ability to help marshal talents and get things accomplished is what we're most proud of. We have done all sorts of things that we are proud of achieving. And of course, we also recognize that there are limits in what we can get done when individual choices and behaviors are involved. We may design and communicate plans and programs for sustainability, but it depends on the behavior of individuals to realize positive change. We are municipal leaders usually, as municipal leaders, usually we have to pull together with our constituents to achieve common good. And that's why this morning's conversation is so important. We have two other examples of municipal programs that are aiming to change residents' choices. We have, again, my good friend, Mayor Maloney of Park Ridge, and Maggie Cherwinski, who is going to talk about getting people to choose biking over driving a car. And we have our friend Pete from Swalco, and Frank, an environmental consultant, will also be talking about reducing contamination in curbside recycling. First, however, we are delighted to welcome a world traveler, if there ever was one, Stephanie Forster, who is an expert on behavior change. Stephanie founded Ensemble Media in 2008 as its creative director and works with nonprofit and public sector partners to strengthen outreach and impact, especially in fields of environment, conservation, and education. Now check this out, folks. She has worked in over 18 countries as a filmmaker, communications trainer, strategist, and storyteller. Earlier today, I just learned that Stephanie is boarding a flight for Paris later this evening, but will be leaving for the airport in 10 minutes because of the TSA limits. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend, Stephanie Forster.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much for that introduction. I feel seen for my need to get to the airport early.
Yeah.
Um, but also nice to see some familiar faces here today, familiar names. And as you know, it's St. Patrick's Day. I just wanted to share with you what my grandfather always used to tell us is that we are 1/17th Irish. So you all think about that for a second. So it's true. What my company does is we work with clients to better articulate their outreach strategies, to develop strong tools for engagement, and to change behaviors to promote sustainable action. And sorry, let me get my screen squared away a little bit. Okay. So in short, strategy, storytelling, and behavior change is what we do. And we work with organizations, some of them you may know, like NatureServe. We also work with municipalities and land conservation groups. And I also co-host a podcast about native plants called Three Seeds Natives that you can find on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And we have probably talked to people you know here in the Chicago region. If you're on this environmental committee, there's a good chance that there's going to be a familiar name in one of our shows. So I wanted to share with you an aha moment that I had. This is now going on 3 years ago, where I think it was one of the COP conferences was going on, and I was thinking about how everybody was so busy awareness raising, and the word storytelling was everywhere. And I just thought, this isn't really bringing up about the important shift that's needed, especially related to climate change. And this was kind of a shocker for me, just because, for 2 decades, I've been storytelling, I've been crafting messages, designing attractive reports, using all these different communications tools for change. But communications tools are definitely relevant and important, but on their own, they actually are not enough to motivate people to change their behaviors to more sustainable ones. So, what is our tendency? Our tendency is information for change. And, we can dig into this for a second. So, like, how many of you have received an email this week meant to inform you about an important issue or seen, a social media post? Maybe just a quick show of hands. Yes. Okay. All right. Pretty much everybody, right? And I mean, that is a really good strategy for sharing information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to change anybody's heart or mind or behavior through an email. So why are we information obsessed? And maybe a more important question is, why are we all trying to raise each other's awareness, like through these emails and social media posts and et cetera? It's actually a matter of instinct. When we care about an issue, we want to make sure as many people as possible are aware of the problem to prevent more damage from being done. So it's coming from a very good place. And this is called the information deficit model. This is just like a communications theory. So the idea is that if only the public or my friends knew more, they would be more likely to embrace the cause or respond to the issue. So how many of you have shouted from your social media rooftop about something that you know will help the greater good? Or have you shared with friends and family, a tip about how to prevent something bad from happening, like keeping your pipes from freezing? Probably everybody, right? So we're taught that awareness precedes action, but is awareness enough? Well, I wish it were. I decided I wanted to go out and actually see what I could find by talking to people in person, and go beyond the theory that I was reading about. So in 2024, I conducted an intercept survey of 25 people at my Highland Park Farmers Market to gauge their understanding and actions related to native plants and biodiversity. So I surveyed these people and I asked them questions about, do they have native plants in their yard? Do they care about biodiversity, etc.? So 95% of people thought native plants were important to biodiversity conservation. So you could say that 95% of people were aware. Yet only 36% of respondents had native plants in their yard. And roughly one-third of those who were aware acted, meaning they may have just identified plants rather than planted them, right? So there's a difference between being aware of something and actually, taking it upon yourself to change what you have in your yard. So there are some assumptions that we often make about information. Um, there's kind of three different types. There's knowledge, there's awareness, is which we were just talking about, and economics. So the knowledge assumption is that if people know what to do, they'll do it. For an example of this, when 40 people were informed about how to conserve energy at home by lowering the hot water heater temperature, guess how many took action? One person. And then here's another economic example. So, if it's in your financial best interest, you'll do it, right? Definitely. When offered a free audit, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this. When offered a free audit to increase home efficiency and lower costs that included free LED bulbs and low flow shower heads, only 6% of people took the audit. So even if it's in your best interest and it's free, you may not opt in. So what does this mean? This means that humans are tricky. Why are we tricky? Well, we're not always rational. I mean, have all of you consistently acted rationally since birth? No, I doubt it. Oh, one person.
Yes, I
Mayor
have.
Burns
Thank you
has.
very much for
Okay.
bringing that up. Thank you.
The other thing is that we are subject to bias. Our judgments and beliefs are subject to cognitive and perceptual biases. So when it comes to environmental problems, studies show that people tend to believe that those problems are more severe globally than where they live. So, elsewhere than here. And that environmental problems will become worse in the future. So things are better now than they will be later. So this leads to, for example, biodiversity loss being ranked lower in importance than traffic congestion or economic conditions because, people don't feel like those things are really happening where they are. The other thing is that people are easily influenced. We influence each other's behaviors all the time. If everyone on your street has access to a compost bin, but no one uses it, you are less likely to use yours because we are reluctant to deviate from the norm. And we may hear about this later from the speakers who are going to follow. Another one, this is a great example. If a sign is posted that says to stay on the trail, but you see that other people have walked off the trail, you may also walk off the trail. And these are, this is kind of going back to social norms, which I'll mention a little bit later. And another really common example, which I think I am also guilty of this, is, let's say you show up at your local coffee shop, you finished your coffee, and you go to recycle it or throw it away. And you're not sure which is the right bin. This is at Starbucks, it's particularly confusing. Are they going to recycle your lid if you put it in there? So you look into the bins to see what other people have done. And usually what you see influences what you do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, what people did before you was the right thing. And then finally, people don't necessarily relate to the natural world. So we tend to see ourselves as separate from nature. Obviously 200 years ago, this was probably not the case. But today, because of the way that we live, it means that, our feeling of connection to nature is less and lower. So, but the more connected we feel to someone or something, the more likely we are to support it and protect it. So how do we move the needle? We need to shift, obviously, from information as the goal to sustained positive behavioral change. So you might be thinking, going from informed to behavior changed seems hard. It does require some thought, but it's not impossible. And I believe you will see a greater impact from doing it. So I wanted to give you a few examples of what this looks like. The informed action is that dog owners know pet waste can harm land and waterways. But what is the behavior change? That dog owners bring and use poop bags on every walk, right? Another one, city residents know composting is a free option. The behavior change is when residents actually compost every week. Employees realize the cafeteria generates a lot of food waste. Okay, that's great to know, but employees need to waste less food. So it's really more about getting concrete around the action. The other thing is behavior change research helps you eliminate the guesswork. You're not throwing informational spaghetti at the wall. You're using research, you're designing, you're testing, you're implementing, you're testing again, you're evaluating. So today I'm going to take you through the first two critical steps to developing a behavior change program. And understanding these will lay the groundwork for successful behavior change strategies and program design. And I think, it's a pretty involved process, and it is a straightforward process, but I think just for the time today, one of the most important things is for us to understand the behavior that we're targeting, and then also to start thinking about that barriers and benefits. And I think this will really set you up for success. So I'm going to use a model that's called community-based social marketing, and this term was coined by Doug Mackenzie Moore. You may have heard of him. And this approach combines anthropology with behavioral psychology and sociology. And there are 5 steps, which you see, which are selecting the behavior, identifying barriers and benefits, developing a strategy, pilot testing, and then implementing broadly and evaluating. So I looked around for a contemporary example to use, but I just really love this example that I'm going to share, even though, we are shifting more to electric cars, et cetera. But there was a Toronto campaign to reduce engine idling in 2001. Now you can imagine the kiss and ride in the winter in Toronto is a thing. People are probably unlikely to turn off their cars because they might get cold. So in this example, 53% of Toronto motorists, and this is 2001, they would leave their engines on at school drop-off, and this caused obviously increased greenhouse gas emissions. So the behavior that was selected was actually kind of twofold. It was to reduce engine idling and shorten the length of time spent idling by all of these people dropping their kids off. So let's talk about the barriers and benefits. So in order to identify the barriers and benefits, they used a combination of things. They did focus groups, they did a literature review, and they also did a telephone survey. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure these weren't landlines, but I'm not sure. So the barriers and benefits found that motorists believe, this is why motorists didn't turn their engines off. Number one, they thought that to be fuel efficient, it's not worth turning off the engine if idling for less than 3 minutes due to the gas required to restart the car. And then B, that turning their engines off and on is not good for the car. These are actually not true, but this is what people believed. But they did identify the benefit, which was that if they did turn their engines off, then local air quality would be improved. So with that, these people who were designing this campaign, they started to identify strategies. So there are a lot of different strategies you can use with this model. There's commitment, which is where you're asking somebody to commit to make a change. Sometimes you can give them like a small contract or something. Sometimes it's a verbal commitment. Prompts, these are things like signs, stickers, magnets. Norms, this is kind of using the messaging that is going to focus on kind of like the values and your neighbor's values, your peers' values, or being part of the in crowd, etc. Social diffusion is another strategy. Commonly, this is something that happens with like solar panels where you may not share your neighbor's values, but you may share your neighbor's like the position of your house. So you could say, oh wow, like they have solar panels on their roof, maybe I can have solar panels on my roof. Services and products, this is pretty straightforward. Communication, incentives, disincentives, these are, taxes and coupons, you could think of them like that, or coupons and taxes rather. And then convenience, making it really easy to do the thing. So for the pilot test, they were kind of testing different strategies to see what would work. And in group A, they used parking lot signs reminding motorists to turn their engines off. And with group B, they used the same signs, but then they added 2 more strategies: commitment and communication. And how did they do that? Motorists were asked if they would be willing to attach a sticker to their window to display their commitment to reduce engine idling. And then they were also offered an information card that explained the benefits. So the pilot test results showed that using the signs alone actually did not reduce idling at all. But using the signs plus personal contact, prompts, and commitments reduced idling by 32%, and it also reduced the duration of idling by 73%. So that is actually a pretty significant difference, but they did use 3 different strategies. And so after they completed this pilot test, they actually did like a website through Natural Resources Canada, and there were downloadable resources. And by 2009, 8 years later, 200 Canadian communities implemented this anti-idling program. So I want to get to, step number 1, which is how do we select a behavior? So I've given you that example. There are some characteristics that you want to think about. The first thing is that it needs to be indivisible. Indivisible, sorry. This means it's specific enough to not be broken down into smaller actions. So for example, reducing water use at home is divisible. But what exactly, what part of that water use are you talking about? You could stop watering your lawn. You could reduce the amount of laundry you do. So what's the specific action that you want your target group to take that reduces water use? And what is their preference? Like, what do you think they would be more likely to do? The next thing is you want to think about, and this is an example, like removing invasive species, not specific enough. Removing buckthorn, specific. Okay, next one, end state. Is the action causing the outcome we want? So going back to that low flow shower head, is it that you want people to purchase a high efficiency shower head, or do you want them to install a high efficiency shower head, right? You definitely want it to be used. So that's the end state goal. So here are a couple other ones that are more specific. Using organic fertilizer on the lawn, not just using fertilizer or using organic fertilizer. Turning off the computer monitor when not in use, very specific. Washing clothes in cold water, very specific. So the other thing you want to think about is how impactful is the behavior? So how much will the action affect the goal? If it's a very minor change, then you may want to look at something else that will have a more likely impact on your target audience. And there are like a lot of calculations for this. You can look up lists of behaviors that have the greatest environmental impact. It could be in terms of reducing emissions, etc. The other thing you want to think about is what level of penetration is already achieved. Like if everybody's already doing it, then maybe that's not the thing you want to go after. But if a small number are doing it and it's working for them, that is a great opportunity. And that, like for example, the composting programs that we're going to be talking about, like if it's working really well in one neighborhood, why is it working there? And is that something that you could try to use in other neighborhoods? The other thing is thinking about probability. How probable is it that more people will adopt it? What barriers and motivators are you aware of? You obviously want it to be low barriers, high motivators, right? So, how easy or difficult is it for people to change? And you can use research to help understand this by asking this question of your target audience. It doesn't need to be a mystery what your next step is. That's what the research is for. Finally, where and who is your audience? You have to think about your target audience and, is it adequately large to have an impact? Do you define it geographically, demographically, economically, by activity? And, just to show you, like with the native gardening research, in-depth interviews revealed that many people use landscapers to manage their gardens and rely on them to advise on what plants to use. So is it better to talk to the people or is it better to talk to the landscapers? Could helping more landscapers become knowledgeable about native plants and promote native plants be a more effective strategy? Because they will be working with multiple households. So right now, we're just going to do a quick exercise, and I'd just like you to write what you think the behavior is that you want to target. And you can write about the issue that you want to address, the target audience, and then the behavior. And just think about those characteristics that I mentioned earlier. We can just take a few minutes for this. I have to find how to get.
We're just directing people to the chat feature
Yeah,
to answer this question.
I don't really have the full screen anymore, Edith, so
It's
I
okay.
don't know where to find the chat,
We're
but
getting some responses there. If you,
oh, I see. Okay, I found it. Okay, reducing salt usage in winter. That's a great one. Low curbside recycling. Anybody else? Reducing lawn chemicals. Reusable bags to the grocery store. Okay, here we go. So Ben from Naperville, because you responded to the three parts. You want to, the issue you're addressing, reducing food waste sent to the landfill. Your target audience is Naperville residents. And the behavior is that residents collect food scraps at home and take them to the free food scrap composting drop-off locations. So here, Naperville is huge, right? So if you're going to design a pilot, for example, do you want to target a specific area, a specific neighborhood, a specific population? Is there an area that's closer to the landfill or to the composting drop-off place or further? Like you want to start to factor in all of these different things because you want to think about actually rolling this out, right? And even just doing, for ease of research, like sometimes you want to pick something that's fairly accessible to start with or picking two groups. It could be thinking about groups that speak different languages, that have different access points to see what would make it easier, more difficult, etc. Let's see what else. Increasing the adoption of electric heat pumps, keeping plastic bags out of recycling carts. Yes. Let's see. Reducing salt usage in winter. Local businesses doing private snow removal. Train on sensible salting methods. Okay, these are all really good examples. Um, so I think, like Jody, for your example, reducing salt usage in winter, who do you want to reduce? Who should be reducing the salt usage, right? Like, is this a particular audience that you're thinking about geographically, demographically? Who is doing the salt? Who is like applying the salt? Is this people? Is it the services of the city? You know, I think digging in a little bit more to who exactly you want to target and then figuring out, how does that behavior happen? Okay, I'm going to go back to, oh, here we go, another one. A lot of composting, recycling, which is great because I know that the other speakers are going to talk about that too. So thanks for all of those ideas. I'm going to actually now shift to what I think is really the secret sauce for a lot of this. And it's something that gets overlooked, I think because, you know, it seems like an extra step, but it's actually so important to the success of any behavior change program. And that is, sorry, community engagement. And I put it in there between select the behavior and identify barriers and benefits. So, I think people feel like, hey, I know my audience, I know my city, I know my town. But guess what? Like, we actually, because we don't even know sometimes why we do things. I was just reading an example of a cold water washing program that they implemented at Oberlin College. And in the survey, they surveyed students, all the students in the dorms were washing their own laundry. And half of the students said, yes, I use cold water when I do my laundry. Turns out zero of the students used cold water. so, so it's always good to verify, right? And also, to make sure you're really talking to your audience. So why community engagement doesn't always happen? Maybe you're already set on a strategy. You think you know the right way to do it. It might be too difficult. It might take too much time or money. You might already know who you're talking to. But why it's worthwhile? It deepens your understanding of your audience. You can collect demographic data, identify groups. You can even find networks to reach out to. once your campaign is ready to go, you find information about their availability and preferences, like where to find them, where to meet them. And then it also builds relationships and trust with your audience. Rather than being kind of a top-down, pushing people to do something experience, it's like, oh, I participated in this outreach or listening event, and they asked me what I think. And now look, this campaign is kind of reflecting that. Another thing is that it can focus your subsequent research and your strategies. So what does community engagement really look like? It could look like outreach materials that reflect the diversity of your audience, listening sessions before project design that are easily accessible, where everyone can weigh in on a topic, open dialogue, transparency about your objectives, two-way communication, a post-session survey that measures participant engagement, where you're asking people, did you feel heard during the session? Were your questions answered, etc. So really, community engagement is literally the combination of stakeholders with common geography or interests being engaged in processes and that support their meaningful contribution. So just something to keep in mind. I know that a lot of times it's tempting to go straight to a strategy, but sometimes the strategies are the most expensive step. And so, doing your really good research into barriers and benefits before, after you've engaged the community will really, I think your runway will be shorter to actually getting the campaign out there, and it will align better with people's needs. So let's go back to barriers and benefits. Let's use the example of the salt, right? So what are the barriers that exist to people changing their practice around using salt? Let's just use like residential homeowners in their driveways, right? So there are all kinds of barriers. Internal barriers are motivation, knowledge, convenience, attitudes, time. Structural, external, program changes, convenience, difficulty, access. So it could be like for residential salt users that it's difficult to find an alternative to what they're using already. They don't really know what else they could be using instead, and they don't want their, the mail person to fall down when they're trying to deliver their mail down their driveway. There could be multiple barriers that exist. It could be, there's just not other things than salt available at the hardware store. The barriers could also be seasonal, right? Like you want to talk to people about salt in the summer, they don't care, right? But benefits, let's talk about benefits. These are the needs the behavior can meet. Economic, social, personal. Maybe people are choosing salt because it's the cheapest option, right? Is a coupon something that might incentivize them to try something that's more environmentally friendly? There are multiple benefits that can exist simultaneously, so you want to prioritize them, and you want your research to help you do that. Motivation is the most important. Motivation is the most important consideration when prioritizing benefits, right? Because that's going to lead to action. So when you're looking at collecting information to inform the barriers and benefits that will lead to design of strategies, you can use a lot of different research tools. A lot of times people start with a literature review to ground themselves in existing research and projects. And sometimes like somebody has, another municipality may have done a very similar project. So that's something to keep in mind. And it can help you expand your thinking, like specifically if you're thinking about the most essential questions you want to ask for surveys, interviews, focus groups. Like a lot of people have already done this work, so don't hesitate to look for what's already out there in the literature. I think the other thing to think about too is consider what's realistic for you, but also what will give you legitimate data and insights. So another tool is observation and mapping. And this could be, going back to the salt example, like you could probably walk around a neighborhood and be able to tell who is using salt and who isn't, especially if it's just snowed, right? So that's an easy way to do mapping. Focus groups, you can really hone in on what people think. Individual interviews are good ways to kind of validate the focus groups, because sometimes when people speak in a group, they might tend to all agree, with somebody who has a strong opinion. And then also in-person intercept surveys, online telephone polls, print postcards. There's a lot of different ways to collect data. So, like I said, you want to think about what's going to give you legitimate data and insights that you can use. You don't want to shortchange research, and you might be not sure what are the right strategies. But I think like starting with a literature review and then maybe starting with like a focus group or doing some observational mapping is a really strong foundation to then go deeper in with interviews, maybe broader surveys. And it's okay to course correct. Like if you find out, oh, you know what, I'm asking the wrong question here, that's okay. Or you need to ask another question, that's okay. You can reopen your research. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's see. I think I talked about this, but other things to consider: the cost of different methods, the time to carry out different methods, the location and availability of your target audience. This shouldn't be a huge issue if you have done some community engagement, you know where they are. And then rigor and validation. You want to make sure that your sample size is adequate and representative and use multiple methods. So talking about perceptions, you want to understand your audience's reasons why they will or won't take up a behavior. And without having that understanding, you may choose a strategy that doesn't line up. So like if the biggest barrier keeping a group from recycling is how inconvenient it is, adding a recycling tax without providing a bin probably won't change their behavior, right? So perceptions are around using quantifiable questions, on a scale from 1 to 5, blah, blah, blah. Digging deeper into perceptions by asking follow-up questions like, why are you likely to do something? Or why wouldn't you do something? And then asking respondents to rank their reasons in terms of importance and explain why is really, really helpful. So I'm almost to the end and we're almost out of time for my portion. So to go from research to action, I just wanted to give you some tools and tips about strategies. You want to get crystal clear on the most prevalent barriers and benefits, right? The strategies that you undertake should reduce those barriers and enhance the benefits. And you want to evaluate the strategies for their impact, reach, and feasibility. And I tend to assume that you'll do a pilot before you do a thing across your entire city. So this chart shows you, it links research findings with concrete strategies to bring about the behavior change of installing low flow shower heads, for example. So if you want your behavior, the high degree of change, one-on-one personal contact, you may not have that available to you, right? But you also want to look at like the reach. So it's kind of a combination of things. How many people can you reach? And then, what's the highest probability of change? So you have some different options to you, and you could use multiple methods as well. So this table is about low flow shower heads. And this is just like kind of a way for you to, it's a good model to organize your thinking. So let's say you've identified the barrier, lack of knowledge about low flow shower heads. The strategy is obviously to provide information, including how to install them. They say, the people that you've surveyed say that saving water and money is a priority. Offering a shower head coupon, that's a great way to save money. And you can also highlight the benefits. Another barrier, it's inconvenient to find and replace a shower head. Okay, well, just like ComEd did, provide one free shower head per home. So that's just some example. So to sum up, behavior change approaches bridge the gap between good communication and an effective, sustainable outcome. The goal is not to convince or coerce people to do something. It's to understand the barriers and benefits people associate with a change in behavior, to address those with research-driven strategies that lead to concrete positive action. And, if any of you want to reach out and talk about what you're working on, you want me to help you think through a behavior, I'm very happy to do so. So thanks for your time.
And I believe without double checking, Stephanie's offer includes flying to France, which is later
If
today.
you
So
provide the jet,
yeah,
we can do that. No problem.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Edith and team, any questions we want to address right away?
But we don't have the questions in the chat per se, but certainly
Okay,
welcome those now. We do have a lot of responses in terms of the topics, and I think Stephanie addressed
good.
many of them, but really pleased with the dialogue and suggestions that we've had in the chat.
Absolutely. And kudos to Ben from Naperville being shouted out there by Stephanie. Well done. I've never been to Naperville. I hear it's very nice. Okay, folks, are we ready to continue on? Next, we look at a few community case studies to see real-world examples of behavior change. We'll start by talking about getting people to bike instead of drive their car. First, we'll hear about upcoming Bike Month from Maggie Cherwinski, who is the Director of Community Building and Leadership at Active Transportation Alliance. And then we'll hear from Mayor Maloney of beautiful Park Ridge. Maggie studied behavior change during her master's program when she was working on, check this out, she was working on organic farms as part of the Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms project, or otherwise called WOOF. Fascinating acronym. Maggie, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor Burns. Let me share my screen 1 second. There it is.
There we go. Perfect.
So, hi everyone, Maggie Schwinsky from the Active Transportation Alliance. Just trying to make my screen full size. It's like, oh, there we go. All right, so if you're not familiar with my organization, we're a nonprofit and we advocate for walking, biking, and public transit in the Chicagoland region. And our goal is to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. And Bike Month is coming upon us, and very excited to hear Stephanie's presentation. And I feel like this very much relates because during the cold season, no one's really thinking about biking, but in May, that's a great time to encourage people to get out their bike for the first time that year, give it a try, or maybe try it for the first time with a friend, with a coworker. So it can really help spur that change in behavior. But essentially, Bike Month is a national event. We celebrate it in our region, and it's an opportunity to really showcase the many benefits that biking can have on our health, on our environment, and beyond, in our pocketbooks, or in our wallets. And so it's a time to encourage more people to give it a try. And I'm going to talk about different ways that you can celebrate Bike Month in your own community. So one, we at our organization, we host something called the Bike Commuter Challenge for anyone in the region. It's free, and it's basically a month-long competition where Chicagoland organizations can compete to see who can earn the most points by riding your bike. So you just sign up. Essentially, it's pretty easy. You ride your bike and you see points come in. You can win prizes. You don't have to be an experienced bike commuter to participate. And we have a lot of resources also to kind of help you or others. And one note, so there are different categories of who can compete. So public agency is one of them, organization, businesses, nonprofits. But for example, the Village of Geneva could compete against Park Ridge, or
Yes.
Naperville versus Highland Park versus Northbrook versus Richmond Park, etc. So all of you can have some fun competition between your communities, or if you're part of a school, university, nonprofit, you name it. So something to sign up for. Look out for that. It starts May 11th. So we hope we see a lot of suburban participants. And some other national events you can get involved in your community. There is a National Bike Enroll to School Day every year. That is on May 6th. And that's just a way to get, schools and youth trying out biking. And a lot of schools in our area participate and are signed up to participate already. There's a national group called the National Safe Routes to School Partnership. They have a lot of great resources to help schools do this. It can be very simple or it can be very involved, so it's up to you. But a lot of schools, you can see a list here of some schools from Batavia, Elmhurst, Hoffman Estates, Palatine. And then also there is something called the Ride of Silence. And this is an annual bike ride that honors those who were recently injured or killed by biking or while walking or biking. And there are rides also throughout our region that you can join. And then a few other ideas. A lot of communities have recently issued Bike Month proclamations, and this is just a way to get more attention to the idea of like, all right, it's May, get your bike out and let's get started. Let's do this together. And some past proclamations have been in Barrington, Bartlett, Highland Park, Park Ridge, River Forest, Schaumburg, many communities. And there are templates out there you can just copy and paste. It can be pretty easy, but it's a great way to kind of kick things off. And community events. So this is really what you want to encourage, because actually doing something can help spur that behavior change. So someone joining a bike ride for the first time can get them, they can feel part of a community and get to know more people and see that other people also bike in their community. So organizing some type of community bike ride. A lot of villages and cities do partner with local groups to do something like this. Bike rodeos, so these are fun events often for kids. It's an obstacle course, so kids can learn how to maneuver their bike, stop and start their bike, learn some basic safety skills. So I've seen a lot of those types of events popping up in the suburbs. Some communities have bike repair clinics to help you make sure you fix your bike, make sure it's in working order for the summer. Some communities have done library displays. There's a lot of good books out there about biking, and there's also a lot of good movies out there about biking, and we've seen some communities host movie screenings. So lots of different ideas out there to celebrate biking. And one other thing I wanted to mention before I turn it over to Mayor Maloney is there are a lot of grants out there that can help you actually build infrastructure to make sure people feel safe while they're biking and walking. So Invest in Cook, if you're in Cook County, that's a really great branch for sidewalks, for bike lanes, for other types of infrastructure related to active transportation. That deadline's coming up, so March 20th. But there's also the Illinois Transportation Enhancement Program. I just want to make sure to flag that for everyone. This it comes out every 2 years. It's our biggest funding pot of money for walking, biking, and trail projects in our state. That's opening in August this year. That picture on the right, that this is in Streamwood, that is a bike ped bridge over Route 59. And that, like, often there's big barriers, as Stephanie talked about, to getting people to walk and bike. And they created this beautiful bike bridge over a busy highway so people feel a lot safer getting from their community to the store, say, or their house to the store. So that the ITAP help fund that project. We're also offering some Cook County communities some technical assistance this year on their grants. So if you're from Cook County and are interested in that, you can contact me. But also the Highway Safety Improvement Program is coming out in the spring, and that can be a good way to fund walking and biking infrastructure. And then lastly, I'll leave you with a few photos of some Bike Month celebrations last year. Upper left is from Niles. They did a community bike ride and then climbed the tower of Niles, the Leaning Tower of Niles. On the right, that is the new road diet, new bike lane in Park Ridge, and they had a ride celebrating that infrastructure project. Bottom left, that's a bike rodeo in West Chicago, very well attended. And bottom right is in Highland Park. They had a Star Wars themed Bike Month event called The Empire Bikes Back. So you can do lots of fun things, can get a lot of people out and trying biking often for the first time. So encourage you to think about biking this spring. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Mayor Maloney.
Maggie, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of Park Ridge. Ready for this? The original 3M or Triple M, Mayor Marty Maloney, is going to speak next regarding biking. Interesting sidebar, folks. Mayor Maloney has played soccer his entire life and has actually coached his children for many years on the Park Ridge Soccer Club. And incidentally, the show Ted Lasso was actually based off of Mayor Maloney. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's appropriate that we're talking about biking and cycling on the 17th day of St. Patrick's Month. I'll share a little bit of trivia with all of you that you can take with you and share the rest of the day if you care to do so. But Ireland, if you didn't know, and it sounds like I'm starting a joke, but it's actually true. Ireland played a pivotal role in the history of the modern bicycle tire. John Dunlop was a Scottish inventor who spent most of his career in Ireland. And one day his son came home from school and complained he had a sore backside from riding on the cobblestone streets of Belfast. And so his father's solution was to replace the hard rubber tires with air-filled pneumatic ones. And he noticed the ride became a lot smoother. A patent was later granted in 1888. And the pneumatic tire, which made cycling genuinely practical and certainly more comfortable, was essentially born in Belfast. So it is appropriate that we're talking about this today. I was going to give a little bit of an overview. I've been mayor here in Park Ridge for the last 10 years, and cycling and biking has been a part of some of my focus each of those 10 years. And our story as it relates to cycling is a little bit of the tortoise and the hare story, because it's probably been progress that has frustrated some in town, but as I keep reminding them, iterative progress is still progress, and that's what we've been doing as it relates to cycling initiatives in town. And so we created a task force back in 2016, focused. It was our bike task force focused on identifying and addressing cycling and biking issues in Park Ridge, how to make it better, how to make it safer, how to make it more widely adopted. So there was a core group of champions on this issue, and they represented the spectrum of cyclists in town. So some were the people that you see, in road bikes and, kind of their Tour de France type close on Saturday mornings. They meet at Starbucks in town and they ride forever and a day and come back. So it was those groups. It was also people like myself who were just trying to kind of get back on the bike after they've, maybe didn't have stopped riding as their kids have gotten older. Other people who have been wanting to find a easier way to commute to the train, and others that are just trying to ride with their kids. So it really represented the wide spectrum of cyclists. It wasn't just people that only ride, 30 miles every weekend or longer. So that group focused on some early successes. We identified ways to improve, stuff at a very easy level, a little bit low-hanging fruit, if you will. So they identified where we could increase bike parking, how to make it safer, how to make the bikes more secure. So we added bike racks and parking to our train stations, both our D Road train station and our Uptown station. We put some cameras in because there were some problems with thefts occurring. So we made it easier and more safe for people to ride their bikes and lock them up over the course of the day as they commuted downtown. We developed a bike plan, or they developed a bike plan for the entire community. And in that bike plan, and it's actually still exists today, although we have money in the budget this year to refresh the bike plan so we can kind of take a look at what progress we've made and why we haven't made progress in certain areas. But that plan designated bike routes around town. We put in wayfinding signage around town. We put sharrows down on the streets where we couldn't do bike lanes and things like that. We did put a bike lane in one area of town, and then the biggest success, which took every bit of 10 years, and I have to thank the other the IDOT and the other communities worked with, Niles and Des Plaines. Active Transportation was a big part of helping us get that bike lane on Bussey. And so what that did was connect our two train stations, so people on the north and west side of town had an easy way and a safer way to traverse to the middle of our city, uptown, and so it provided that route for those folks, and that actually just was in place or just opened last year. So the moral to the story, and that's why I kind of equated to tortoise and hare, is that we just keep making progress. And again, we weren't, whereas the tortoise was competing against the hare, we were really competing against inertia and not making progress. So my goal was to kind of keep making progress, keep getting adoption. And this goes to something I think Stephanie mentioned during her presentation. One of the complaints I got as the bike lane was going in this past, in the last probably 20 months, was, well, I never see people riding their bikes. And that was, the claim, because we see cars everywhere, right? So then people don't see bikes, so they think that people aren't cycling. But again, the train stations were a perfect example of that. When we put in more parking, we made the parking bike parking, and we made that bike parking more secure. All of a sudden, those bike racks were filling up, and then we had to put more bike racks in. And now I can tell you, not today, but when the weather does get better, those bike racks fill up on a regular basis at our trains. Even as commuters have gone down and not come back to their peak levels, we still see our bike racks filling up. But so again, it was one of those things that again, as Stephanie mentioned, the more people that people saw riding bikes, the more comfortable they felt to in fact ride their bike, and they felt safer, and they felt, again, that it was behavior that they were seeing. And so we've seen more and more cyclists come out. As I mentioned, we're refreshing our bike plan this year. There were some projects identified in there that didn't move forward, so we're going to take a look at why that is. And some of that was, we identified, and I should back up, and I apologize, I'm kind of going off some notes here. The bike plan it was primarily focused on cycling, but there were also some pedestrian things in there as well, how to make certain crossings that we all know in town are fairly dangerous and fairly kind of hairy, how to make those safer. So that's the bike plan that is being refreshed this year. We'll kind of take a look at some of those things that didn't move forward and why that's the case. And then to dovetail, a lot of those events that Maggie talked about, I took some notes for events we don't do, but we do have a lot of those here in Park Ridge as well. One that didn't get mentioned, but one of our churches in town has adopted an annual bike blessing that takes place like right towards the end of May as kids are getting out of school. And so kids are encouraged to bring their bikes to the church, and they come out and bless the bikes. And then our police department's there to pass out stickers and promote safe riding and things like that. So that we do that here in town every year, which is always a fun event. And then my wife and I attended a meeting. We actually left the zip code, which is something I don't do too often, but we left the zip code to go to a meeting in the city of Chicago that was held by Chicago Family Biking. And one of the things they do and they're working on is promoting bike buses. I don't know if any of you have seen, there's some videos on YouTube of a bike bus that takes place, and they're all over the country and all over the world, but there's one that sort of really picked up popularity in Portland. And so the person that created that bike bus in Portland was speaking at this event and talked about how to safely begin a bike bus in your community or in your neighborhood. And there were some folks from the city, their neighborhoods from the city, that have created their bike buses. So I'm working with some folks in town at some of our local schools, as well as some school board members here in Park Ridge, to try and launch a bike bus for at least some of our schools. I'll be happy with at least one if we can get one done on May 6th, which is that bike to school day. So we're working on that kind of as we speak. And that really, again, our thing at Park Ridge was to make consistent progress so that more people kind of came on board with this. And frankly, not just within the community, because there are critics of cycling in town, but also from a staff perspective. I think our staff, there was some skepticism from staff about bike lanes and some of the things that would be required. And I think as we've kind of taken these consistent small steps forward, I've seen buy-in from our staff who kind of recognize that this is an effort worth doing. And we've had great adoption from some of our local communities. We've got a Go Green group in town. We've got a couple of different sustainability focus groups that have certainly promote this as well, and have helped to, when we've needed some pushing at a council level, they've been able to help encourage members of council to continue to support these cycling initiatives. So again, that's really the moral to my story, is that between the tortoise and the hare, the tortoise ended up winning, and we are continuing to advance that ball.
That's a great analogy. Is Park Ridge, Mayor, a complete streets community as well?
We are. We
We
are.
are.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So, fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to rethink water. And I am proud to invite Ann Grooms, who is the office manager of the city of Joliet, which is, of course, the home of Hawkeye Pierce from the TV show MASH. Ann manages a team of public utilities call center administration staff who manages the city's Rethink Water public outreach campaign and the waste conservation program. Ann's going to talk to us about her program, but keep this in mind as you listen to Ann present. She is an avid motorcyclist since 2019, and brace yourself, folks. She actually rides with a group of ladies called, and I'm simply reading this, Stilettos on Steel. With that in mind, Ann, good luck.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Let me get my screen shared here.
Now, do you ride a Harley or what do you ride?
I do. I have a Harley Sportster with a Frankenstein trike kit.
Well, whatever the hell that means, but that sounds great because I ride a Schwinn Huffy with a banana seat and baseball cards in the spokes. So
yeah, it means I'm on 3 wheels instead of 2.
oh
So,
my
when
God,
you can't do what you want to do, you figure out how to make it happen.
I
So,
like it.
can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to share some components of our outreach campaign. To give you a little background, Joliet is one of 6 communities that formed the Grand Prairie Water Commission. We're changing our water source. Currently, Joliet is on deep wells, and we all share the same aquifer with these other 5 cities. And we are changing to Lake Michigan by 2030. Knowing that rates would need to increase to accomplish this task, we have started water conservation. And I lost my mouse. I apologize. There we go. We started water conservation initiatives by reaching out to the public. We had to start with some city code changes. We developed a customer water portal, which I'll dig into in a little bit here. We've done rain barrel subsidies. We're up to 831 of those for the life of the program. We do low flow toilet rebates. We're only at about 62 for those. We have an incentive program that's quarterly, water conservation stakeholder group, community water conservation plan, and just further education any chance we can get. We do partnerships to achieve a lot of these things. Our rain barrel subsidy program, we partner and residents are able to pick up their barrels out in Morris, and it's worked very well as opposed to when it was only delivery only, and because the delivery cost is actually more than the cost of the barrel. So through that, it's been a great increase for that part of the program. We have partnerships with the Will County Green. We do a water conservation ball game each year with the Slammers, and we'll be doing that in July of this year. We're a WaterSense partner, and we also are a gold level water ambassador since 2023. I mentioned earlier the customer water portal. It's very similar in a sense to if you have a smart meter with ComEd and you get that weekly report. This doesn't quite give you a report, but you're able to check in on your water usage anytime you want to. You can set up alerts. If you're going to go on vacation and you don't feel comfortable shutting your valve off, because maybe somebody's going to come check on the house, you can set up an alert that you shouldn't have usage or minimal usage. And if there is usage, it would send you a text or an email so that you can have someone go check on your home and figure out what's going on before you get back. There's also usage alerts. My bill, I would normally use 300 cubic foot per month. And if I set that to know when I've used 2.5 100 cubic foot, And if I've reached that halfway through the month, I can really, look at my water usage and go, okay, I need to behave for the next part of the month here. Similar to how we look at our minutes maybe, or, usage of our phones. We do find that in order to help our residents, because not as many of them signed up for it as we would have thought. So we do a report here in the office where we look at continuous consumption, where we don't see any breaks in their usage. And then we reach out to them either by phone or email or mail to make them aware of the usage that they have going on. Because I would like to find out if something was running in my house after 2 days as opposed to 30 days when I get my bill. And then I'm still going to get another bill after I've fixed the problem because we bill in the rears for water usage. So it's just a way for us to try and get ahead of it when the customer's not looking, make them aware that this program exists, and they're more likely to use it once they've had a problem. It's getting people to use it before they've had a problem in that proactive sense that that's a behavior that's been hard to crack. Let's see. So one of the other items we've also done is to encourage water conservation is to change the tier method we had for billing. We have expanded our first tier to come all the way up to 300 cubic foot. So that way, if we have residents, a single person living at home, they should be able to stay in that one first tier, especially for our seniors and those types of residents. I, as a family of 3, am generally able to stay in that first tier. Our middle tier is from 4 to 7, and the third tier, which is the highest rate, is everything over 7. If I'm a resident that doesn't really care if I'm watering my lawn for hours on end, I'm going to pay that highest rate. So it's a definite benefit to those who are actively trying to save and allows them to pay that lowest rate. For our next steps, it's just constant education with our public. 2030 is getting here quicker than you could imagine. We just keep going with our water conservation programs, attending public events, and attending different kinds of public events. We found that going to a landlord event through one of the realtors has really helped us to reach out to that part of our population and introduce the customer water portal to them, and they're able to monitor all of their properties quite easily without having to rely on honesty of their tenants. So that aspect has worked really well for them. And without attending that public event, we would have never figured that connection out. We're going to continue with our continuous consumption reporting and reaching our residents in a different way, helping them before their bill gets too big when we can find it in the report. And then implementing recommendations from our community water conservation plan. We went through an update of that last year, and we're going to steadily work at doing some things for our commercial side of things as well. And that about sums everything up for us in a nutshell.
Well, thank you very much. It's a huge undertaking to connect to Lake Michigan. Unbelievable.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. We have just actually installed some pipes in Geneva to hook into Joliet and not have to pay for it.
We'll charge you.
Yeah, we appreciate your cooperation. Let's transition, folks, to reducing contamination in the recycling stream. We have 2 distinguished gentlemen, Frank Pettis, who's an educator, an organizer, and a proud Waukeganite who works to reduce the adverse health effects of environmental hazards and climate change. Frank is the founder of the environmental consultant firm Greenlit Solutions, LLC. And this is a fun fact that we asked these people to submit. Frank is an avid reader and lover of exotic fruits and travel. Now, I think there should be a comma in there because a reader and lover of exotic fruits. I don't really want to go there, but anyways. And then we're going to hear from Pete. Pete Adrian has been talking trash since 1994. Check this out. When he managed a student-run recycling program at Northern Illinois University. He has been with the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, or SWALCO, since 2001. And our friend Pete calls Gurnee home, where he and his wife, who is a fourth grade teacher, and their lovely 3 children reside. So Frank, Pete, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to get real started quick and save the best part for last year with Frank. So thank you all for joining us. Great topics here today. I think it all comes into focus here. Just so you know, SWALCO, the Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, is what we call a joint action agency. Back when the Solid Waste Management Planning Act was created in 1989, Lake County, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the municipalities would be better served managing the solid waste plan as a group. So we created another level of government, and we represent 43 municipalities in Lake County, including the Naval Station Great Lakes, and we've got some other involvement, and definitely some of the MMC members are up here in Lake County. We were fortunate enough to be a part of a grant that MMC applied for through the US EPA, the RIO grant, otherwise known as the Recycling Education and Outreach Grant. This is a $2 million grant that was awarded to MMC, one of the largest grants for recycling education in the state of Illinois, probably for over 30 years. Back when the solid waste management plans were formed, the state did give up some money to the counties to help them develop those plans. Since then, there really hasn't been a lot of support to implement any additional programming or education efforts. So Lake County, we focused on something that we had done a little bit of work on previously in a couple other communities. That was what we call cart tagging. Going out and getting a team of enthusiastic individuals to hit the streets and flip lids and take a look and see how the recycling is stacking up in those carts. Our goal was to try to reduce contamination, increase participation in our recycling program. So the feet on the street was led by our good friend Frank Pettis here. And I'm going to pass it over to Frank, and he can share with you a little bit more work that we've done in the core communities of Waukegan and North Chicago, or Waukegan, Zion, and soon to be North Chicago.
Okay, Frank, before you kick off, man.
Yeah.
I got to know what kind of exotic fruits you like.
No, spent some time in Haiti and Jamaica, and I have to say, some of my favorite, they've got a fruit called Meme apple, which is amazing. Soursop, amazing. Pink pomegranates, or I'm a huge fan of pomegranates, but the pink ones and the white ones are otherworldly. And we have a really good grocery store here in Waukegan called Lewis Fresh Produce. People come from all around, and they have a good selection of exotic fruits.
So if we drop your name, we get a discount?
Yeah, we're working on it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Put that in the on the agenda for the next meeting.
Sounds good. All yours, Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And just like Pete said, right? We, really fortunate to be working with SWALCO. A lot of moving parts to this project. And starting right with this, we had been hearing for months and months, right, about the relatively high level of contamination in Waukegan's recycling stream, right? But really didn't know, if there was progress around it. Got in contact with SWALCO, who really led the charge of bringing everybody to the same table. All right. So just for background for folks unfamiliar with Lake County, really diverse county, right? And you've got 3 cities that, folks from the area call the Tri-Cities, which are Waukegan, Zion, and North Chicago. And these are your more working class slash low income communities right along right along Lake Michigan. A lot of Spanish speakers, right? So immediately when I started to hear about the problem, I'm like, okay, how much of our information is translated and accessible for the majority of the community, right? So Pete, Walter, who's with Swalco, and others started to organize these calls, right? Bringing the haulers in, LRS in Waukegan and Waste Management in Zion, into conversations with both municipalities, right? Folks from the mayor's office. We have a few on our call today from our, we've got Nicole here from our development team and zone planning and zoning team as well. Bringing everybody into conversation to discuss the specifics of the issue, right? And that led to conversations where Pete and I actually went to LRS to speak with the drivers to see what they were seeing as they were, doing their job. And LRS, which is our hauler here in Waukegan, had put in a policy, basically a 3 strikes and you're out policy, right, related to recycling. Okay, they're hearing a lot of issues from the place where they bring the recycles, that there's so much garbage leaked in it that it's becoming a major problem. And so they put this policy in place. And in speaking to the drivers, they had these tags that they were putting in the carts. And as they would put the carts on the tags, a lot of folks would come out of their homes and try to speak to them, but there was this persistent language barrier there, right? So ultimately, we decided on cart tagging, right? To, as it says on the slideshow, to proactively invest in public education, right? So we contacted local nonprofits in the area, community leaders, right, to reach folks who had a good understanding of each of these communities we wanted to work in, right? Really important. Okay, and a lot of them were, native Spanish speakers as well, because we knew that we had to meet residents where they were. Okay, credible messengers, right, means that, the folks who are communicating the rules also have an idea, just like our first speaker said, of the reality for folks on the ground, right? Why this issue should matter to them. Okay. So we sought to build buy-in through direct action and engagement, right? The teams that we had on the streets, they luckily, right, because of a lot of things that were happening in our community with ICE and, a lot of the federal stuff, we didn't knock on anybody's doors, right? We waited until garbage day. We walked up and down the streets of our targeted neighborhoods, and we selected 2 neighborhoods in Zion and 2 in Waukegan to start. And thankfully, LRS and Waste Management, the haulers, were really generous with sharing their data around contamination, so we could focus in on these hotbeds of contamination, right? So we would walk through the streets and we did it first couple of days, and folks would look at us with more skepticism, right? But by the 3rd day we were out there, folks would come out of their houses and directly engage with the taggers, right? And they would ask them questions about the nature of recycling, why certain types of plastic were recyclable and others weren't. Right? They would share their frustrations, with some of the practices of the haulers, right? They a lot of them mentioned that they were bagging their recycles to prevent litter in the street, right? But we really wanted to focus on this non-punitive act of, building awareness and connectivity with our neighbors. Okay, so that's kind of the approach that we took here. I'll go to the next slide. And as you can see, each slide has our recycling mascot, Loop, in the right-hand corner, who's been a really big help to us in marketing this whole campaign. So that brings me to the qualitative results, right? And as you can see, they're striking, right? Because it hints at a really successful program. Now, mind you, this was more of a pilot, right, to contain zones, but these were the areas of each city with the highest rates of recycling contamination. Okay, and as you can see, we have 2 different case studies here, right? Zion, the initial recycling participation rate was a little bit lower, and this could be attributed to they have a bi-weekly recycling model as opposed to Waukegan's, which is weekly. We found that about 60 to 65% of their residents were participating in the program, but we also found that about 50% of all the folks who were participating had recycling contamination, right? And 90% of the contamination in both cities was people bagging their recyclables. Okay. So really important, just to backtrack a tad, Pete and the SWALCO team were really proactive with public communication, right? With sending out postcards to the homes that we were going to visit, with, newsletter, press releases, contacting local newspapers to keep the public as informed as possible, right? And along the way, making sure that all of our communications were not just translated, right, but were translated by native Spanish speakers, right, to catch those nuances in the language that, folks who speak the language would pick up on. And after the first week, right, we started to see progress right away. Okay, you can see on the right hand of the screen, 50%, um, uh, 50% 50% contamination in Zion compared to about 60% in Waukegan. Waukegan has a slightly larger Spanish-speaking population. But after that first week, right, we started to see the contamination rate decrease, and that trend continued for the full 4 weeks that we were in Waukegan and the full 8 weeks, right, because of that biweekly model in Zion. And we ended up in a relatively similar place in both cities at the end of our campaign. And that is almost a 50% decrease in Zion and over a 50% decrease in Waukegan. All right. So these are more of the qualitative results. I'll move to the next slide. Yeah, so then the qualitative, sorry, the last slide was quantitative. This is the qualitative results. Okay, so the bin taggers really, became bridge builders for residents, haulers, and municipalities, right? Carrying these rules to the doorsteps of our residents, but also making sure that the concerns of the residents were heard by the haulers, right? We had one elderly Hispanic woman who brought to one of our taggers' attention in Spanish, right, because she didn't speak English, that she would love to participate in the recycling program, but her cart didn't have any wheels, right? And she had been, they have a customer support line, LRS, but she hadn't been able to reach them and convey that message. And because our tagger met her at her doorstep, we were able to get her a new recycling can overnight, right? So language barriers were a big issue. Okay, bagging recyclables to prevent litter was another big issue that we heard from the community. People who thought they were helping, right, by putting their recycles in bags. Okay, and this really relates to our early assumption that people will change behavior when they have more information and when they know why it matters to them, right? So, and folks could articulate our history of environmental injustice in this area and why we are so committed to turning this corner. Okay. Also, right, we developed advocates for sustainability, right? Bolstering not only interest in recycling and sustainability from the public, but from our municipal partners, right? A lot of folks who are willing to contribute and just run with this effort. Okay, Waukegan is also a recipient of a CEJA, a Clean Climate and Equitable Jobs Act workforce hub, right? So we're trying to build this clean energy workforce, and participating in bin tagging was actually a starting point for a few of our taggers who actually enrolled in that program, right? So we're creating kind of a segue as well. Okay, we have our second round of tagging that's set to begin in April, right? So we're going to be going back into Zion, going back into Waukegan, visiting the homes that we visited before to make sure that the progress is sustained. And we're also going to add new areas of engagement, right? So a few more neighborhoods where we're going to branch out our program. So we'll have a good mix of old and new. And then a few of our partners at the city of Waukegan, including a few folks on this call, were instrumental in launching this commercial recycling pilot program, which just launched a few weeks ago and is not directly related to the REO program, but is definitely in relation to it, right? When you think about the momentum that we were able to create and just the dialogue around these. So We're going to keep it going, keep the boots on the ground, and we're also going to branch out, right? Make sure that we're getting loop in the community, engaging the youth in after school programs, because this is really a turning of the page for the three communities that have been historically overburdened by environmental hazards in Lake County. Okay, and I'll stop there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, both to you and Pete. I'm going to ask my colleagues at the caucus to help us. We've got about 5 minutes left regarding, are there any questions that we want to address specifically before we announce our next meeting date?
No, we don't have questions. We have a lot of dialogue about
Good.
exotic fruit, which is really cool.
Excellent.
And I'm into it too. What I wondered if we just couldn't either hear from Stephanie, if she's got any closing thoughts, or the other panelists, just feedback on, because everybody presented these cool strategies and it seemed to follow Stephanie's recommendations in these 5 steps. But I wonder if we could bring our speakers back and just see if they had any responses to other strategies or anything from Stephanie.
Of
Of course,
course.
we welcome questions from the audience as well, but from the committee. So thanks. Stephanie, not to put you on the spot, but what do you think of our?
Yeah, I don't think I have any great revelation except to say that each of the other speakers is very thoughtful, and really, I think the thing that stands out to me is they really are seeking to understand their audience, and the populations that they're working with, and something that I hadn't mentioned specifically, but that a lot of what people were saying, there's kind of a through line with all of us, which is really a little bit focused on empathy. It's like putting yourself in the shoes of the group that you are trying to engage and trying to reach, and thinking about what is front of mind for them and what their priorities are. That is really, where all of these, I think that's where success lies, is really, making sure that you understand what the barriers and the benefits are. Many of the things that Frank just mentioned too. That's kind of my takeaway from what people shared.
Anyone else, feel free to chime in.
I
Otherwise,
just want to comment,
yes.
One of the things I think that all of these examples and what Stephanie's bringing through is this idea that I brought it up before is to really exemplify our love for our communities. And I think everybody on this call are in your roles because you have a love for your communities that you represent or live in as well. And I think that's really what this human touch aspect of it is really getting in that, the trenches there. I mean, you all know when you talk to somebody, that's when you get the most, valuable, I don't know how you want to call it, but you could send out emails and posts and newsletters, but really that boots on the ground, as we call it, in doing these cart taggings is where the learning exists, it occurs. So that's all I have to say.
Well said. Thank you. Anyone else? Because we have a heck of a meeting coming up on the 21st of April, folks. A combined.
Wait, we do have 2 questions from Trustee Lawrence, if you want to go ahead and ask those specific questions for speakers. Trustee Lawrence, do you want to come off mute and ask her a question?
Okay, sure. So during the waste collection process, the recycling waste collection process, other than in-person tagging as a way of flagging contamination for the driver who will pick it up, how is contamination status evaluated, or is the hauler going to pick up the recycling bin regardless of the condition of what's in the bin? Does his optical reader say too much contamination, I'm not going to pick it up? Or do they just wait till they get to the dump floor and then there somehow or other the issue has to be addressed?
Yeah, great question, Dina. I'll take it on and then pass it to Pete for more info. So all of our trucks have cameras on them, right? And so the driver would be kind of caught in a bind because early on they were collecting all the recycles, right? And they would bring it to the MRF. The issue is that, the MRF is saying, hey, it's too much garbage mixed in here, right? So that kind of led to a cracking down, and the drivers had to train their eyes to see, okay, what's not recycling in here. And so they would they started to collect it. Sometimes they would set the bags. A lot of it was bagged recycles. They'd set it on the side. But that wasn't efficient enough. So they had to transition to this three strikes policy where they would leave these tags on each of the cars. Yeah, I don't know if Pete, you wanted to add anything.
No, I think you got it right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question was regarding water, the Joliet water supply changing over to Lake Michigan water. So currently Joliet has these wells, and I'm just wondering, will all of those wells be decommissioned, or will some of them continue to be used, perhaps at a lower rate, perhaps for various industrial or local areas, or are they all being decommissioned? And I'm just thinking about the overall environmental impact of that water then rehydrating the water table and the natural hydrology that might potentially benefit for a lot of it not being evaporated, for example.
Okay. I don't believe they are going to all be decommissioned. I don't have all of the specific details of that yet, but we will be using Lake Michigan solely, and then we will have some items for backup. That's all still being formulated to, have a final outcome to what is what. So it's a little early to say at this point. But as far as us coming off the aquifer is not recharging, which is the problem for the 6 communities. And it's hopefully by the 6 communities coming off of that aquifer, anyone staying on it can continue to function for a little bit longer down the road, even though for their own wells, they'll be having to dig deeper and deeper. But that's what I know as for now.
Thank you.
Anything else, Edith, before we announce the next meeting?
No, Cheryl put the links to the meetings you're going to announce in the chat.
Oh, good. April 21st, we have a combined meeting with the Caucus's Energy and Environment Committee and the Housing Community Development Committee, which is going to be cool. Whole Home Electric Program, Tuesday, April 21st. Same bat time, same bat channel. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for a very robust and informative discussion. We appreciate it. We thank you for your good work. We wish you a very safe and perhaps a little bit warmer St. Patty's Day. Whatever the heck you do, do it safely, be good, and thank you.